Preface. My laptop runs GNOME on Kali. Every cent I have ever made has depended on my ability to navigate and utilize Linux both from a GUI and the command line. In a very real sense, Linux pays for the roof over my head, the clothes on my back, the food that I eat, and all the massively expensive tech that I need to produce this very video. You don't have to sell me on the operating system, I already know. Possibly the most antisocial trend in consumer operating systems right now is people recommending desktop Linux on their social media threads of people asking for technical assistance with Windows. Here's 10 arguments on why you really shouldn't do that. 1. You are being plain rude because now is not the time. Computers are integral to people's lives. Gone are the days of family photo albums. There's hordes of dumb Luddites who don't have offsite backups of important files. If someone is having issues with their computer, they may very well be in a crisis. Telling a Windows user to switch to Linux as they are having problems is exactly the wrong time. You don't sell a fire suppressant system to someone whose home is currently burning. In fact, they will likely seek out solutions in their own accord after they've resolved their crisis. Number 2 is vendor locking, because many users simply can't switch to Linux. There aren't many programs that still don't have a direct equivalent on the Linux side. For example, if you're in audio production, you are keenly aware that plugins are fully fledged applications rendered by the OS, making them OS specific. It only takes one crucial plugin in your chain or one game with kernel level anti-cheat to make an OS switch untenable. And no, virtual machines aren't a real solution. If you're running Windows over top of Linux with a virtual machine, you're just running Windows with extra steps. In fact, those extra steps add more points of failure for the applications running inside the Windows VM. Depending on the needs of the application you're running in the VM, it might not run at all or be plagued by undiagnosable problems. So not only have you not managed to get away from Windows, but you've managed to worsen the experience of using Windows. A user who cannot switch to Linux because of an application that only runs in a regular non-VM installation of Windows is vendor locked. Understand that it is not their fault that they can't switch to Linux. 3. Switching to a different OS is neither difficult nor simple. You don't need to be a tech professional to create a bootable device, boot to it, and install a new OS. Mass adoption distros like Ubuntu make this a simple operation. The real issue here is footguns. Formatting a drive to accept a new operating system is the mother of all footgun operations. No matter how many guardrails you put into an OS installer, people will find ways to do anything from wiping their own data to making their machine inoperable. Worst of all, the user doesn't even have to do anything wrong to end up with a brick device. Ergo my aforementioned Kali Linux laptop. I used the laptop to write a bootable external drive. The program told me everything was a-okay with the installation image, but the installer crapped out with a generic error message. This was after the drive formatting stage, so if this had been my only computer, I would have been screwed. I just don't feel comfortable recommending that anyone switches operating systems unless they've got a second computer as a backup or in-person assistance by someone who is technically adept. Ideally someone who will force them to do the unglamorous pain in the back end part that everyone skips, namely backing up everything. Most pertinent to us is that a person capable of switching to Linux already knows about Linux. Think about that for a second. Linux is everywhere. It's unavoidable. A permutation of Torvalds kernel exists in every Android phone and damn near every smart device on the planet. The capture card that I use for video production isn't supported on Linux desktop distros and is probably the reason why I'll switch my laptop back to Linux, and it probably runs Linux. My point being, if someone is technical enough to be able to safely switch operating systems, then they already know about the existence of Linux and what the pros and cons of switching look like. They don't need someone to come in and sell them on the platform. 4. Linux is a more complex OS to manage and maintain compared to Windows, but that's merely an indisputable fact, not my actual point, which is that being less technically adept doesn't make you stupid. Let me repeat that because this is a pervasive view in the tech industry. Being less technically adept doesn't make you stupid. It just means you have different priorities in life. Many people have neither the time nor the inclination to overcomplicate their tech. Tech is meant to serve people, and the simplified user experience can be better for the user's computing experience, even if desktop Linux is a better choice on paper. Most people who use aging computers to do nothing but access the web would be better served by a leaner OS like Linux, but those same people aren't knowledgeable enough to maintain a Linux system, which, let me re-emphasize, does not make them stupid. Number 5 is the reason behind my preamble to this video. If you recommend Linux to someone, do the bare minimum and make sure that they don't already know about Linux or already have a Linux machine aside from the Windows machine they're complaining about. I've seen people recommend Linux to IT professionals on social media. I have been told to install Linux under the exact same thread where I told someone that I already run Linux. Despite the preamble, there's a non-zero chance that someone in the comments will recommend me Linux or tell me that I'm doing Linux wrong. Just Please don't. Number 6, you know the Windows machine someone is complaining about might not be their computer, right? Like someone in their extended family has a problem with their Windows machine, but the person complaining online can't just up and switch the machine to Linux because it's not up to them to make the decision for the machine's owner. Even if the issue the relative is having is endemic to Windows, one can't unilaterally saddle them with Linux. Number 7, speaking of not their computer, how many companies let their employees choose their OS? Best case scenario, the designers get Macs, the email jockeys get shitty little Windows laptops, while the software engineers are given whatever makes sense to the CTO, aka the CEO's cousin thrice removed by way of interspecies marriage. I'm a renter, right? I get junk mail about home improvement all the time, like water heaters, insulation, heat pumps, all that jazz. Do I need to explain myself any further? Number 8, desktop Linux is just severely lacking on a user experience level. You can plug your ears all you want or live in a fantasy world of your own creation, but the desktop Linux user experience just plain sucks. A UI-centric operating system should be directly configurable through the UI for a supermajority of users. Demanding that regular non-technical users use the command line for crucial functionality is absurd. This deficiency extends to a lot of open source applications because UX designers don't need to work in open source. Developers who work on open source desktop applications often do it to pad their portfolio. They have to do this because the vast majority of paid backend development work ends up closed source, leaving them nothing to show to prospective employers. All a UX designer needs to pad their portfolio is screenshots of their work, which they are allowed to take the vast majority of the time. If I take code snippets from my employer's repository and put them on my GitHub, I could get arrested and sent to prison. If there's anything that demonstrates how crucial UX designers are for desktop application projects, it's open source Linux applications. All the crappy apps Microsoft bundles with Windows that barely anyone uses, like Paint 3D, Print 3D, the 3D model viewer, Phone Link, or the 3 different permutations of apps that can play video, assuming that you've got the stupid codec extensions, all those applications are light years ahead in terms of user experience than their equivalent open source Linux desktop alternatives. Case in point, GIMP. Telling someone that GIMP is an alternative to MS Paint is like giving a toddler a modern road bike with integrated headset cable routing in parts instead of a tricycle. GIMP is an abject failure in user design. GIMP is such an abomination that it single-handedly downgrades the reputation of Linux on desktop by mere association. I hope GIMP gets killed off soon so I can piss on its grave. You know what, that's a bit much. I think GIMP is a great no-cost alternative for applications that cost a bit of money but are actually usable. I think if you want to torture someone, just lock them in a room and tell them they can get out once they figure out how to crop an image with GIMP on an air-gapped machine. Okay, I'll actually stop now. All I'll say is, I don't use GIMP because I'm a sane person with a fully licensed... Oh my god, wrong eye. I can wink with both eyes. Great, because I'm a sane person with a fully licensed version of Photoshop installed on my Windows machine. I'm sure people have made great things with a GNU image manipulation program like paintings of guys in suits. Google GIMP suit if you want to see some of those. LibreOffice is a great alternative to Office 365 that works somewhat seamlessly most of the time, but it doesn't have the same level of cloud integration, which for better or worse is crucial in modern business settings. Even worse, the Linux desktop environments themselves are full of user experience flubs, mainly issues with pointer input. It feels like every time I install Linux on a machine, there's always some issue with the touchpad or the mouse. The fix always involves shoving a command to fix it in a script that runs on startup. This time around, I couldn't even do that because even the regular GUI setting wasn't working. I needed the touchpad to use the natural direction of scrolling, so I chose that. Nothing happened. I restarted the machine, still nothing. I googled a bit and found some hidden settings in a file I had to modify via sudo vim, which didn't work either. I eventually completely switched my desktop environment from the custom Kali Linux Xorg flavor to GNOME, which fixed the scrolling direction issue, but didn't fix the scroll speed, which is still maniacally fast for some reason. I recently came across a post on LinkedIn that detailed someone switched to desktop Linux from Mac OS of all things. They appeared to have a creative pipeline, and intrigued as I was, I read through their list of steps. They had a total of 8 command line and configuration file fixes, the first step being a touchpad fix. Selling Linux to regular users is futile as long as the computing experience itself sucks, and you can't deny that the experience sucks without gaslighting users. Number 9, you'll get less... I forgot to add number 9. At 10, my final note is this. Just because someone is pointing out issues commonly found in desktop Linux, it doesn't automatically mean that they are defending any other OS or the organizations or philosophies behind those operating systems. After owning very expensive HDR-capable hardware for about 4 years, I think I was able to get my Windows machine to run HDR properly just last week. I say I think because I haven't A/B tested my change, and if the fix did work, I will lose my goddamn mind. For the record, the fix involved disabling every display output device other than my primary GPU through my BIOS. What I mean to say is, macOS has a near perfect HDR implementation and awful game support. Windows has a mostly broken implementation that can't tell you when it isn't working, and Linux touts HDR support out of the box for the Steam Deck OLED and no other machine. You can get HDR to work in Arch if you hate yourself and you don't value your time on this planet. There is no perfect OS for any user. They are all inconceivably massive software suites, each of them trying to appease certain types of user, but also every user at the same time. macOS targets creatives, Microsoft targets business people and gamers, desktop Linux targets software developers, but they all seek to monopolize the desktop operating system market. Linux is not just ubiquitous, it is so crucial to so many industries that if the project fails, it could change the course of our civilization. The entire world counts on Linux, so it's one of the most well-maintained pieces of software ever. Desktop Linux piggybacks off that to provide an OS that has a pretty niche target market. To succeed, Desktop Linux needs a community full of contributors building an ecosystem and advancing the product, closing the feature gap between it and the paid operating systems. I don't believe Linux needs salespeople because it is one of the few truly free software products in the modern age. If the software is free, the user is the product, except for Desktop Linux. It is the platonic ideal of free software by using quirks in how tech corporations operate to leech tooling and development effort from them. If Desktop Linux is free, information about it is freely available, and it's not that hard for the average person to get a nerd to help them with the installation process, then there must be a justification for its low market share. Desktop Linux is not a trailblazer. Neither Microsoft nor Apple announce features before they start working on them. macOS and Windows set the course, and Linux is always stuck catching up. Desktop Linux is trying to win a race whilst not knowing the route or where the competitors are, only hearing about the location of the finish line when the competitors announce they are about to cross it. In order to become a trailblazer, Desktop Linux needs access to development resources that I don't think it will ever have access to without massive streams of income. Desktop Linux is truly free, and it is remarkable how far it has come, but without the fire hose of money that Apple and Microsoft are privy to, Linux on the desktop can only go so far. Being annoying about advocating for Linux can't ameliorate that and can only serve to hurt its reputation with regular consumers, especially the few who can actually switch to it. Desktop Linux has to compete with mega corporations in every way, including the PR and advertisement apparatus of those corporations. Desktop Linux needs fewer people mindlessly arguing for its adoption and an impossible number of new contributors.